G'day, welcome back. Continuing the series on Queen versus Bishop Pawn endings. Today, we've already covered the ones with the Bishop Pawn on the 7th rank, and we've already covered the drawing zones there, and I think it did Rook Pawn drawing zones as well. And then normally, typically, you go back to the 6th rank, the games are won by the side with the Queen. But you can see there are some oddities, right? So even on the thumbnail there, you're just looking at a sort of a structure where it's black to move. I did that structure with the bishop on the 6th rank and the king on the 7th rank with black to move. So then black has sort of different sort of ways of handling the position. And if the white queen is on that GB3 square, all the green squares is where to win for white. And you can see that annoying square of D5, which is only a draw for white in that position. And as we'll see, one of the keys here is the diagonal. A8 diagonal often is needed to put the pawn in a pinned position, and you do not have that in this case. Okay, so that's what we're going to look at today, that position. And what we're going to do is sort of go through a list of sort of examples, real examples and problems that people have had, and then I'm going to sort of reasonably systematically, I'm not going to cover every position, but reasonably systematically look at different queen positions and what the drawing or winning zones for the white king is, and then as this is an edge cases, we'll just sort of go through some of the solutions. What's the defensive resources for black in some cases, and the general sort of theme for the winning line. And I think what we'll see is that the example games we're going through are, players, 2,000 rated players, because I think that if you're a GM or IM or any strong player like that, you are most likely, you know this idea. And even if you don't know all the sort of ins and outs of it, you can knot it out over the board. Okay, so let me just quickly go to the capture screen. So I found a bit of text in one of Averbach's books, and it says, several drawn positions with the bishop pawn on the 3rd rank are also known, which is what we're going over today. Now, I'm assuming Averbach or Muller or John Nunn have probably, done all this and worked out all the positions. And then the draw depends upon the fact that the white pieces interfere with each other, i.e. sort of blocking diagonals, in like that case I just showed you, in the battle with the pawn. And when the pawn reaches the 2nd rank, the white king is outside the winning zone. So that's kind of the way of thinking about it. So it's all been done before, but we're going to sort of look at it in a bit of sort of this process. You can see I've highlighted what we're going to look at today there in the sort of the outline of this video. Look at some real world mistakes, and then we'll use Scoutfish to find those, and we're just going through 5 games. Obviously there's a bigger set of that, and then we'll sort of go through these exceptions and sort of look at things that you can look at. What we're saying there is that you have the extra tempo, but your king's also outside the winning zone, as Averbach just said. You can't pin the pawn in a lot of cases. Sometimes you can't check the king when you need to, and basically we'll see later on these key squares e4 and g4. If the queen gets there, you're going to win. And if you can't, for one of those reasons, then. So let me just go through those steps first of all. So just briefly, I mean, I'm using Scoutfish. You've seen it many times. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. And basically what we do, we screen for this material, king and a queen versus king and a pawn. Obviously, you do it for black and for white. And then I want the pawn to be on, let's C3. Obviously, there's constants for those, but if you can multiply by 8, you can work it out. And here's the other one. So white has the pawn. Pawn's got C6, F6. And if you have a look at that, the queries look like this. Query sequence. First of all, you have this material balance, and the subfen is where I'm looking for the king and the pawn in the sort of the positions. You remember last time I was sort of moving. So that'll give you all the sample games. When I actually go to the theory ones, I just use that position. But obviously, with this search for example games, I do that. And then we'll just show you run Scoutfish, and you come up with a set of games. And I have a set of games here, and you have a look at this database. So I actually got a set of games, look for first 5. And down the bottom, I put in the theoretical sort of ones we're looking at, A5, D5. That means D5. And we'll just sort of, so we've got a lot of sort of different sort of screens that I'm flicking between. Apologies about that. Hopefully, it all makes sense as we progress. Okay, so let's crack straight into some of these games. This is a typical sort of situation. What's the Brian versus Go, and promote your queen. This is a winning position. Doesn't mean you're going to win. So black pushes his pawn onto the 6th rank. This is kind of that sort of key setup, and there's a couple of winning moves. But basically, the idea is to advance your king towards the black pawn, and he did it the wrong way. Let's say, look, king to a6 is wrong. Now, why is it wrong? Because you lose access to this square in some line. And let's have a look at the way to draw c2. So if I mark it up, didn't mark it up. If the king was not blocking, then you just slot down to a1, and then black cannot stop you from sitting on the c1 square, and then you're winning, right? But because you moved the king into the way, you can't do that. So you do check, and then you attack the pawn. So you can approach with your queen. But you can see the problem here, that remember you go into the corner for stalemate tricks. You will notice that the white king is outside. Now, because black is on the corner side of the pawn, it's actually that sort of pink zone, so white cannot get into it. Game ended up a draw. So let's go back to this position where white made the mistake. This is just running through these examples to understand. So king c6, way to win. So it's king c6. And then if you go to, that's the one I've go to best. Let's have a look, c2. Exactly what I said. That's totally winning. You've blocked the pawn, right? So that you wouldn't do that. You'd do something else. You'd move your king up. Okay, so let's have a look at the two possibilities. If you move to b2, then this allows this tactic, and then now pawn is pinned. You really go back there. How are you going to advance? Because if you push the pawn later on, then the queen can go all the way in the corner and back into there, which is a theme we'll see a lot. And the other possibility is king to c2, is that now basically white's inside the winning zone. Okay, so just that this tactic at the very start of that position. So that's example number one. Let's move on to the next one, and we'll go down to the key position here. Let's have a look. We'll go back to where. So the white king is well outside the winning zone. Pushes the sixth rank. Have a look. White's winning. Check there is fine. King f1 is the right move. Right. So this is the key. There's the line which was played. Queen to a1, which doesn't win. And that is a winning line. We'll go back to the winning line in a second, right? So we moved there, and now the problem is that checks from the left-hand side are going to just allow the pawn to advance. So therefore, white just played another check, and now he can't do anything. The pawn's going to advance, and this will be a draw because although he was in the center, the white king was so far away that the white king was outside the winning zone. Okay, so let's go back to here, and that check is fine. And this queen b5 check. We're going to see that move in a lot of these positions. So let's see how queen b5 check works. So we go queen b5 check. Now, you can't go to g2 because you pin with a queen to d5. Go through that and put that on, but let's just let it pin it. And we've got this position again where black either goes in front of the pawn, doesn't make progress, or black steps back to g3, but then he can never push the pawn because you'll fly into the h1 square, right? So this is the position. You've just been checked. You can't go to g2. Okay, let's try g1. Now, the side check works, and you can see that's a standard theme. We do this bounce back to there. Now we've got to the position we want. I want to try one more line. King f1. So queen b5 check. So we tried g2 and g1. And what about going there? Then check. King e2, check. And we're on the square we want. Once again, that if black ever moves to that square to advance the pawn, then we will go to that square and we'll sit in front of it. Right. So you can see what was missed here is at this point, queen a1 check resulted in a draw, whereas the check on b5 followed by most likely a pin on b4 or another check down here was the winning strategy. Go to the next one. So this one is, let's get the position. Actually, this was a win earlier. We could go back, but we'll just look at this position here where white picks up the extra pawn, still winning. You can see it's showing king d4 as the win because that gets the white king inside the winning zone. Let's just do what wasn't played for starters, and then what we're going to do, we're going to press the pawn, step across, and then now what's black going to do? It goes here, but the pawn in, so it's going to drop. Go back to this position here where white made a mistake. He played a queen e1 check. G2. This is still winning. He plays queen e4, and we've got that setup we wanted. So remember, e4. This square quite often, that square sometimes, but he didn't play it. King's outside the drawing zone. King's outside the winning zone, so you've got to bear that in mind. But he moved his king in. Yeah, so he played his king in at the wrong time. Now the pawn gets pushed, and you can see that The white king is outside the winning zone for the king being in the corner side of bishop pawn. So that was quite unfortunate because basically you go back to where we started from. In this position, king d4 wins. But after the check and the king moves, king d4 no longer wins, but you can see you got the perfect setup. Queen e4, you're a win, right? So try and remember that pattern. That formation is really, really important when sorts of end games. Let's go to here, right? Same situation. Obviously, the king often ends up way up on the wrong side of the board because one other pawn was queened and you sacrificed the rook for it, and then so you're left with this sort of situation. So this is winning, but it's quite funny. Only one move wins. Queen e7 check does not win. Let's see what happens. King to f1, that's the right move. Threatening push the pawn, and that's all over. You can see that the white king is outside the winning zone. Okay, so let's have a look what the difference is with queen e8 check, the other move. Okay, so you can see we've got access to that square, but what's the difference? King f1. Okay, we can't. No point going to e4 at the moment. But now queen to b5 check. I think you remember this move. So I've coded up. I coded up in some, not others. So if you go to g2, I'll pin you on the diagonal. And if you don't go to G2, then I'm going to check you here, and I'm going to hit that square again, right? So the difference was that E8 gave you this check, whereas E7 didn't give you the check, because moving there is not check, because the king's gone to F1, right? Reflect on that, and we'll go one more game. Oh, this one I went back earlier. I thought this... Okay, I did the pawn endgame. There's an interesting pawn endgame in there. Okay, here we go. Same position. King's outside the winning zone. Positioned winning. And right, just have a look at it. What do you think the winning thing is? Remember, I mentioned this diagonal many, many times. The win is just there. You've pinned it, and the only way to advance the pawn is to move the king back and advance the pawn, but then I'll just pop into that square. That's the thing. But what did white do? White played queen to h4. He's obviously banking on that square, but the problem is you don't get there. We just push the pawn, right? So that's sort of that example. Here's one. I did want to go one further example where it was a draw and a person. Okay, you can see that the queen and king are a long way away. Now, if you play king to g1, I've mapped out all of them. That's funny, right? So I did actually do a lot of those. That's the move played in the game. Then we just close in. And this cutting like that forces the king on this side, and therefore once we play our king in the winning zone, we'll be winning. Yeah, so that's another tactic to remember, not just these squares, but also cutting on the P or the G file. Right, so let's go back to this funny position here. So I showed that that move did not draw, but king e2. That's the only drawing line of all those lines. Right, why is that a draw? This is actually one of those positions we may look at later, which is really bad for white because the king is on this diagonal. So typical continuation, check possibly. Once again, you can see it doesn't allow the check on that square. King's in the way. That's quite bad. And we just push the pawn. And the difference is that, look here, the difference is that if we check on b5, for instance, then basically we can do anything. White can't do anything. But the pawn, to have the pawn advance to the 6th rank is the big problem here. It's too late, right? Obviously, this is just the standard position. So this was quite a funny position, actually, where the reality is that you have to know to go to e2. Everything else loses, right? Let's pick another one. Just say, let's say we get e1. What's wrong with going to e1? Now we check one, and we've got this b5 check and the bounce, right? So it really depends upon not allowing that check. And then let's say we go there, fly across here, and the same thing. If we go to the H file, we're going to lose the pawn, so we go to there. And now black has to go into that area, the winning zone. Okay, so that was quite interesting as well. Just trying to go through a few of these patterns which occur both for the defender and the attacker. And then now what we're going to do is use the simulator and have a look at some of these edge cases. Okay, if you remember how the simulator works, move one piece around, and the circle piece, the king, shows you where the king is. And you can see that top right, it says black to move, and it's a win. So let's switch it to black to move, and it's a draw. So you can see that queen is on a1, then little top corner, b7, b8, and a8. Black to move, it will be a draw. And there, although we can have a look at that. D1, it's on D5. And you can see this is going to be a common theme. It's blocking the diagonal, which allows you to check across. It's obviously a bit unusual when the queen's on those squares, but I'm interested in this square here. That's B3, and you have that D5 square, so we'll have a look at that. We'll come back to that. So you can just see generally, and as the queen moves further along, then you get a few squares. A lot of them are top left corner and sitting on the diagonal. You can see the worst square there by far is the E7 square. And we already saw that in one of the examples because the check on B4 doesn't achieve anything, right? Now you can see there's a few squares all dotted around, and there's different patterns associated with what's going on with each of them, right? So let's move to, I don't really think, some of these squares here are a bit weird, so let's go here. So we're going to just pick one example. What happens if we are on the A3 square? Okay, so I'll just freeze that for a second. So we go to this, you can see I've done that A3, A8, save. That's the position we're looking at, and black to move is a draw. So let's see how black draws. Okay, king to G2. So we are now threatening to advance our pawn, so you can't check sideways because just advance the pawn. It'll be a draw. And you can see on problem with A3 is that you don't have a check on the G file because you don't reach over there, and you cannot get on this key A8 to F3 diagonal. So a combination of the factors outside the drawing, winning zone for the white king, and I haven't got the winning zone shown here, but you can certainly visualize that the king is outside it in that situation. Right, okay, so that shows that, and then if we just go back to the starting position, let's change it a little bit. If black doesn't play the right move, let's say he plays king to E2 instead. So now we have the time to check, and dive into the E4 square. Okay, so that maneuver there, you're going to see over and over again, is what white should be doing given the chance, and black should be avoiding that at all possible cases. Okay, good. So that's that. Let's go on to the next position using the simulator. So queen was there, queen's there. So this one, if it's on B3, only D5. So let's have a look what's going on there. Find that game, B3, D5, save. Okay, right. So once again, king G2, only move. Right, once again, cannot check on these diagonals because we'll just press the pawn. So can't do that. What else can we do? Want to get that square. Can't pin because the king's on the wrong square. Can't get across to that square because the king's in the way, which I think is the difference. So let's move around and see what happens if the white king is on B6, just to give you an example of the alternative. But basically, there's nothing to be done. Okay, so let's get back to start. Okay, same position, black to move, and now it's winning because go to G2, go there. That's simple. And go to E2, check, E1, check, and we get back to this position. So you can see the difference. King there versus king there. Big difference. Okay, cool. Let's go back to the simulator. Let's keep on trying some positions out. Okay, from the fourth rank, you can see on the fourth rank, you're just going to slide into either E4 or G4, and it'll be a win. Yeah. Okay, so here's an interesting one. It's going to be the same thing. Let's see if I've got A5 versus D5 loaded up. I've actually put a few lines in this one. King G2, as you'd expect. And once again, diagonal's blocked. So you can see it's got the same problem. Good. Okay, let's go to the next one. Same issue, that square is causing the problems. Go over to this side. Less of an issue because we can get to either E4 or G4. Just remember, that's why squares on the right-hand side of the board, you've got two choices. Okay, we'll skip that, but you can see 5D5 has the same issue. Yep. A6, C6, same problem. Try and find something a bit different. Okay. Right, how about this one? This actually reminds me a little bit of that first example we saw, but it's a little bit different. So let's have a look at what happens when we're on A7. Go to one of those games. Let's see what you do here. We go king to F1. And there's no check here. And there's no check here. And the queen F7. Just advance the pawn. Yep, so you can see that the king is blocking the key diagonals there. Keep going. This one would be quite interesting to look at. On e7, a whole lot of squares. Now, I think that the first thing to look at is that we can't check on the second rank because of where the queen's positioned. So that's one key problem. Actually, that's going to be the main problem, to be honest. So, and the diagonal is also blocked in some of those cases. So let's go to some of those positions. E7, D8. Right. Let's have a look what happens here. Simply king F1, no checks. So we're going to prevent the pawn next move, right? And then in the next game, same thing. Oh, this is, sorry, next one. So this is one where it's winning. What is the difference? So let's play king F1, for instance. Problem is that we can't go here because we'll get checked. Can't go here because we'll get pinned there. So yeah, king to F1. Now the problem is that, oh, okay, the king is close enough, right? So that's the d7, d6 square. Otherwise, you can see that the problems with interfering checks and so on is the main issue. So let's keep on having a look at a few squares here. These ones, they say, oh, okay, this square, although we've got access to the g4 square, is not a win. So let's have a look at g7 versus those corner squares on the top left. Okay, so when you move king to f1, we can't go to the corner like we want to. We're threatening to push the pawn. Check, try and approach. King g2, can't check on the left-hand side, so we're going to check again. Go back to f. What are we going to do? There's no way of stopping that pawn from advancing to f2 and win, right? Because even if we do this, the white king is just so far away, right? So it gives you a sense of why that move didn't work, and it gets back to the fact that the queen is on the wrong diagonal. If the queen was on that diagonal, then you'd have this key square here. Okay, so let's have a look at what the ones we can find. Okay, so this one's interesting. So it's h7 and g6. That one load up. Now, remember I said one of the other key defenses is using the G file to cut off. Obviously, very bad position. Can't do that. King G1. Can't do anything. Pawn's going to advance one more square, and we don't have checks either, right? So maybe the thing to do is what's the difference when we're on the H? King was on G7, then we would have a check here and a pin there, right? So that's the difference. Keep going. So the very last row. Oh, see, that looks like a terrible position, but actually it's fine. Let's have a look at why it is fine. That's A8 and C6. Don't know if I've coded that one up. Let's have a look. King to F1, G1, you get pinned straight away. Check. King there, check. Can't go towards the center of the board because you get cut off. So maybe H2. And so this is the tempo move we gain, right? Black can't push his pawn, and we're going to get back to the pinning key square. So that's another pattern to remember. Yeah, all these interesting little patterns to think about. What else can we do? That'll be the same as before. Have a look if there are any other positions I wanted to have a look at. This one. Okay, so what's wrong here? King F1. How are we going to stop that pawn advancing? No checks. I'm just going to advance and actually use that as the move. Got to push the pawn though, because once you didn't push the pawn, just to bear in mind, if you didn't push the pawn, well, what else are you going to do anyway, right? Say you move to king, you're an idiot, right? Then we're just going to zoom in. Like that wins the pawn straight away. Right? Okay, cool. So that's good. So let me have a look. If I've covered what I wanted to do, right? So the Scoutfish stuff, gone through the example games, and then so just have a look at those constant patterns that we saw a lot. Definitely the importance of these two squares for the cross pin, and then black is totally stymied and can't do anything, and you've got plenty of time to bring your king up. So I found that very interesting. I'd never looked at that sort of particular endgame in that much detail. Now I've done it, I think I understand that a little bit better, and hope you enjoyed watching it. Thank you very much.